questions in the last few days over Tucker Carlson's most recent comments with respect to the Columbia Journalism Review and his helping to start a third party, or what he is avowing to do with respect to helping start a third party. Some whom understand that the gist of these live streams is to look at everything, whether it be ecclesiastical, social, political, what have you, to look at everything through the lens of Christian ethics, might ask the question, what does this necessarily have to do with any of these things that you normally touch on? Well, as we've stated before, this is irrespective of what people's opinions are. We're going to shed light, the truth of the gospel, onto everything, because the gospel has extension into everything. And by the gospel, I mean more specifically Christian principles. And being that Christians are a part, an essential part, of the political process in the United States, and they are citizens of the U.S., and they are asking the questions pertinent to what citizens should be asking, which is, how well does it go for my country currently, for myself, and what are the prospects for future generations? It's an important subject to dwell on and to have questions answered from a Christian perspective. We're not going to limit ourselves, as others do, in the name of so-called bipartisanship, or that doesn't necessarily pertain to the gospel. We're not going to limit ourselves with what we talk about on these live streams. I've said that before, and I'll continue to say that in the future. Besides, I do want to mention the following. There are Christians whom, unfortunately, are of the view that since the Bible says that we are not of this world, that our citizenship is in heaven, that we should necessarily then not have to worry about worldly things because they are temporary and passing away, and we should have all of our focus on the tomorrow, on eternity. To which I say it's curious that you were to take that position, because if that necessarily means, if the conclusion of that idea, those principles so-called, if that is what the Bible actually teaches, then why is it necessary for you to work? Why is it necessary for you to feed your family? Why are all these things necessary if, again, the only thing that matters is the tomorrow? In other words, the answer to how one should approach the here and now and the prospect of eternity is not the conclusion where one should completely disavow the here and now, the present. All the opposite. The Bible actually has a lot to say about how we should conduct ourselves in the present, and also the preparations that we make for eternity. It's an all-inclusive sort of situation, and this includes then the well-being of one's community, the well-being of one's family, the well-being of one's nation. Those considerations ought not be dismissed by Christians, but it's the thought process, the inverse of this, which leads Christians to think, why are we even talking about this? This isn't important. All the while, these very same Christians are complaining, and one hears them complaining about the diminution of their nation, the diminution of their communities, the diminutions of their congregations. And then you have to ask the question, are these people tone deaf, or is it that the sanctimony is getting the better of them? I think it's the latter. But anyways, enough of that. We're going to cover the particulars of what does happen to the country, what could potentially happen if a third party is in fact built. This is something that Tucker Carlson, as I said at the beginning of this live stream, recently stated, as quoted in the Columbia Journalism Review, and this is given a lot of rise to criticism and conversation about what would happen if we introduce a third party into American governance. What would that look like? What would that portend for the future of America? What would that portend for Christianity necessarily? We'll talk about it in this edition of the Irrespective live stream. Welcome each and every one of you to this new live stream edition. Before I continue, some housekeeping items that I must keep up with before we continue. If you have not done so yet, as you see in the chyron below, subscribe. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell, click that thumbs up button, and please make sure to share our content with others if you enjoy and you are edified by what we do here. Also, I would encourage you to interact with us, interact with me in the live chat, whether you're watching this on Rumble, YouTube, or X, by asking your questions or placing your comments in those chat rooms. Do not forget to donate. It helps us to continue to keep the lights on here. In Irrespective, the QR code just appears over the screen. Scan that. Conversely, there's a link available to you in the description box that you can click on or tap on depending on what device you're using to watch this transmission. Last but not least, do not forget to follow us on the socials. X, our username is Irrespective77 on that website. And on TikTok, our username is The Irrespective on that platform. Okay, here is the quote that everybody has been talking about in the last few days. I'm going to help build a third party. This is according to Columbia Journalism Review and what Tucker Carlson has said. I'm going to help build a third party. There should be a good faith effort to figure out what benefits the country. I mean, if you make $60,000 a year, you're degraded. Your life expectancy has gone down. The promise of your children's lives is likely gone. No one seems to care. It's not even a factor. What about Hamas? I officially don't care about Hamas. The U.S. government should have as its first priority the welfare of its own people, and that's where the ending of the quote is, and that is the quote that has had people talking about this. Now, being that I am a believer, I am a Christian, a biblical Christian, and as our stated mission on Irrespective has been from the very beginning, is to see everything through the lens of Christian ethics, because as I've said before, the gospel has extension into every aspect of existence, whether it be social, political, economic, ecclesiastical, what have you. Christianity penetrates into all aspects of life. So therefore, we have to take a look at this and see what this portends. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that there is a palpable frustration in the country with respect to the future of the country and the current prospects of not only the youth, but even of very many elderly. Because the fact of the matter is that if one lives in a prosperous nation, one would expect necessarily that has trickle-down effects to the average person. And what I mean by average person, I'm not speaking here about either the criminal element, or although it does have some extension by necessity, as it were, with respect to law and order and things of that nature. But if you have a generally stable society, let me use that phrase, if you have a generally stable society and one that gives everyone an equal opportunity, not, did you notice I did not say equal outcomes? I said equal opportunity. That is an important distinction. An equal opportunity to get ahead in life or to live a good life, one would think that then generally speaking, most people would be enjoying the benefits of that sort of stable society. But herein lies the problem. By most metrics that are available to judge whether or not a society is stable, and if we're going to use Christian metrics, which is the more accurate assessment, the more accurate standard that we should use to see if, in fact, the nation is healthy, the United States is not currently a healthy, moral nation. Putting aside the typical, shall I say, red meat that Christians usually allude to in order to profile the current state of the United States, whether it be the level of infanticide, whether it be the national debt, the exploding national debt, all of those things. And I grant you, those are considerations. Absolutely, I'm not discounting that. But we're going to look more at the minutia here, because in many instances, that minutia actually gives you a better glimpse of what's actually going on. I mean, infanticide is pretty bad as it is. Any country that allows its people to commit abortion is already bad enough as it is. But there are other indications also that give us a pretty clear view of what's actually happening on the ground. Look economically, for example. When you look at the fact that the younger generations their prospects of getting ahead in life economically are greatly diminished compared to the previous generations' abilities to get ahead in life, whether it be through home ownership, the prospect of a well-paying job to support a family, all these metrics, you notice that has been basically greatly diminished. The fact that private debt, we're not talking about public debt, talking about private debt, is now in the trillions of dollars. People are indebting themselves to the point where they have to put gas and groceries on credit. And yes, there's a lot to be said about personal spending habits and how that isn't necessarily the problem of the federal government. But I would dare say that what you're seeing at the federal level is a reflection of what is happening at the local level. Let's face it, the representatives are representative, in a sense, of the people that put them in power. And when you look at our elected representatives, the fact of the matter is that the people that put them there, they're pretty much the same. You look at it, the people who put these people in power are practically of the same milk. Many American voters are just downright uninformed, ignorant, and concerned with things that, frankly, are not important. That's just current American society as it stands. I could sit here and give you statistics through statistics through statistics, but I'm pretty sure if you've been on social media for some time now, you've already read most of them. You've heard more and more pundits talking about it, about the affordability crisis and all these other things. Again, leaving all of those talking points aside, the main question that we have before us is why the impetus for this so-called third party, this rising third party, and why are Christians sharing in that consternation? Well, first and foremost, when you think about our current political makeup in the United States, I think there is a level of truth when you think about the phrase that has been used by people whom are interested in politics, in American politics more particularly. They call it the uniparty system. And by the uniparty system, it's reflecting the reality on the ground, distanced from the typical presentation from the political and media class to the American public about a two-party system. Yes, they will tell you, these groups, that you have the Democrats and the Republicans. And a lot of Christians have bought into that divide. They've thought for a long time, yes, we definitely have a two-party system in this country, and that's our political makeup. The fact of the matter is that when you look at the particulars of how America is being governed, if you can call that proper governance nowadays, in fact, it's more of a one-party system, just with differing shades in one way or another. If you were to ask me to summarize the current makeup, structure of the political apparatus in the United States right now, it would be you have your Democrats whom want to centralize power to make more money for themselves whilst instituting communism for everybody else. I know that's an oversimplification, but that's in essence what you have. You have the Democrat Party, in essence, is the party of statists whom are trying to make buck off of the public while presenting themselves as being concerned for the everyman, for the average man. And then on the Republican side, they speak a great game, as it were, about resisting communism and favoring free enterprise and the free market and civil liberties and things of that nature. But in practice, when you look at their votes, when you look at what they propose as legislation, what they support, they really aren't that much different than what they support on the Democrats. They support foreign wars. They support the bloating of the federal government, of the federal budgets. Not only that, if I were to summarize jokingly what they would propose, in essence, they would convert America into an open-air strip mall that would only be represented by the biggest corporations, because Republicans, while they talk a great game during the primaries and whatnot, once they get to Congress, once they get in positions of power, in essence, it's about whatever the donor class demands from them, whilst they present these things that they forward to favor their donors and the donor class as a win for Americans, when it actually turns out to be detrimental to the United States. So in essence, what you do have currently, and a lot of people have woken up to this reality finally after many years, is that, in fact, you have a uniparty structure in the United States. So it's not merely just a talking point, there is a reflection of reality. Now, being that these two groups, although they present themselves as inherently opposed to one another, the fact of the matter is that these two groups have caused a lot of problems in the country by the way that they vote and the things that they vote for. One popular example that I can give the audience to prove this point is, think about this. If the Republican Party were truly an anti-statist party, why would they continually support a kill switch, as they call it, for vehicles, new vehicle models starting in with 2027 models? Or others are saying that it starts with 2028 models, not automobiles. Some of you are asking, what's a kill switch? In essence, basically put, this new surveillance technology that the government is mandating from the Biden era to put into newer vehicles would actually allow the government to disable your vehicle from afar, local, state, and the federal government. They would mandate that vehicle manufacturers would put this technology inside a vehicle, so you pay for it, but government can control where and if you go somewhere. I mean, think about this. The Republican Party, many of them voted in favor of this. They voted to keep it. The Democrats overwhelmingly voted for this system. So when you look at just that one example, you see in unison they're voting for things that inherently grows tyranny and grows the state, which many Christians have been looking at this sort of situation. And even under a presidency of Donald Trump, whom supposedly is the great protector of Christianity, what have you seen? An increase in tyranny, an increase in statism, an increase in a government that really couldn't care less, even though the people that are in Congress and in the halls of power care about their people. No, they care more about the donor class. They care more about corporations that are lining their pockets. They care more about foreign entities like Israel. You've got our ambassador, whom supposedly was a former pastor. One wonders, with all the things that he states, what it was that he taught. But, you know, I say that jokingly. I use that sarcastically. Actually going around in the last few days, acting as a propagandist for Israel, saying that Christians in the United States have to give thanks to God for Israel because, in essence, without them, we wouldn't exist, when historically that's just not accurate. But he's acting as a propagandist under the flawed theological assumption that somehow Christians owe their existence under Christ to the Jews. You see, all these things, I know it could be dizzying where these things eventually lead. But at the end of the day, what you have currently in the United States, when you're awakened to what is actually the case, not the talking points given to you by the media or the political class, but what is actually happening on the ground and substantively is happening, a lot of Christians are concerned about what's going to happen to the country, looking at all these things put together, and they're asking the question, would it be then viable? It's attractive to them when they hear a person like Tucker Carlson saying, well, maybe we could open a third party that's more interested in what is happening to the average person. Maybe that will fix the country's woes. Well, you have to ask yourself certain questions. Number one, are we talking about a third political party that is going to be filled with the same types of people that currently occupy or carry a D or an R next to their name in the ballot box? And I know that seems quite like a simplistic and reductionist way to present it, but please consider with me, again, using Christian ethics. Consider this with me, what I'm about to say. What makes me think that the people whom are that run for office, that use the tactics of, I'm going to concern myself for your well-being, that's the typical pitch to voters, right? Whether they're an R or a D, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, that's a typical pitch that they use to get elected. What makes me think, or you think, that that isn't going to be the same type of presentation that this new third political party uses, and the talking points of America first to achieve power, and then when they achieve power, actually not come through on their promises? So a third political party might seem like a viable option, but what I'm doing here is I'm trying to point out what the Bible points out, which is human nature is always going to make an appearance. And I know some will listen to me and say, Gio, but necessarily then what you're doing is that it's almost like you're trying to kill the baby in the cradle to a potential solution. No. What I'm telling you, and I'm not, by the way, some will accuse me of saying you're currently defending the very thing that you have spent the first couple of minutes of this live stream denouncing, the uniparty system. No, what I'm telling you is that Washington, D.C., by the way that it operates, is necessarily corrupt. And how do you vet, as it were, a person's intentions when they run for office? Because that's the thing. When you look at many of these people that, especially the so-called outsiders, that go into, or they say they want to go into Washington and shake things up, you have no better example than Donald Trump, a guy who supposedly was a multi-billionaire that wasn't beholden to the system and he was going to resist the system. What has he done? He has become the system. He has actually, that's the very thing that Trump ran on. Trumpism, make America great again, was supposed to be giving power back to the people, and the guy has turned out to be more swamp than the very thing that he said that he was going to drain. So you have to ask yourself the question, what's going to be different from this third political party that many people like him, and it seems to me from what I've seen, The interviews with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Joe Kent, some of these guys that are the so-called America First crowd, you hear them and you can tell that behind the scenes they're actually trying to formulate, they're trying to push forward this idea of starting a third political party in the United States. But you have to ask the basic questions here. And I know I'm raining on a few people's parade here. But it's not because I don't want to give practical solutions to what this has to do, to how we have to fix this. The thing is that when I give the solution, a lot of people are not going to want to hear that. Because let's face it, most persons would rather offload their individual responsibility to others instead of they doing the work for themselves. This is the current problem with America as I see it. It's not about whether or not we have a second or third or a fifth or a 10th party. Look at Europe. Many countries in Europe, in their parliaments, they have 5, 6, 7 different political parties, all vying for power. And it doesn't matter which one of them you put, whether it's in France, whether it's in Germany, whatever the case may be, you see that nothing changes. And they have multiple political parties in these places. I was telling my wife recently, look this up and you'll find that I'm not lying. In Sweden, they actually had a referendum to see if they would reduce, the public would vote in favor of reducing immigration greatly into the country. Just happened a couple of weeks ago. Upwards of 50% of the country, in what has become known colloquially as the rape capital of the world, now Sweden, a formerly peaceful country, a formerly very stable country, more than 50% of the population there, knowing the problems that they have, actually voted to keep immigration levels at their current levels. Explain that to me. This is trying to prove my point. Most people on the ground, they see the problems, but they're not willing to institute the solutions, or they themselves are not wanting to be part of the solution. They'd rather just leave it, offload their responsibilities. When you think about this in the light of what it actually means to be an American, which that has been greatly diluted nowadays, and Christians have unfortunately been part of the problem in that they have allowed others to dictate to them in a country that was created by them and for them, to redefine to them what it actually means to be American. And what do they end up doing? They take that definition and they run with it instead of saying, no, that's not what it actually means to be American. Gio, give me an example. I'll tell you. When you look at the makeup of America when it started, when it was founded, it was about what some have called rugged individualism. And some Christians, I know that they take issue with that presentation, but that was in essence the idea as posited by people like Thomas Jefferson, like Benjamin Franklin and others. They wanted what they called a middling class, what we would eventually come to know as a middle class, of independent people that weren't dependent, as it were, on government or anything to keep, as it were, liberty alive and well in the United States. But that has gone through a transformation of sorts throughout the years. That spirit of independence has gone through a transformation of sorts where even today, the person who calls themselves a conservative actually doesn't subscribe to that very idea. They actually like their statism in a way, in a shape, or in a form. More and more people that I hear nowadays calling themselves conservatives, they're actually putting forth policies that years ago conservatives would have even imagined to advance, because they knew that inherently it would grow the state to the detriment of the liberties and the civil liberties of the public. So you have to ask yourself, again, with this third political party, what is it that we stand to gain or to lose? The first question I asked, considering human nature, is who's going to run for this third political party? Who's going to be a part of this third political party? What is, if you think about it, what is the platform going to be? That's number one. As I said earlier, I guess that was the first consideration, but I'll throw it in second here. Human nature dictates that man is man and man is going to manipulate, because that's human nature, fallen, sinful. What makes me think that the people who run for this third party aren't going to act like the Democrats and the Republicans already do, talking a great game, but when they reach power, they're just going to act the same way? Especially when one considers how entrenched the way things are, business as usual, as it were, is in Washington. That's the third consideration. With respect to the system itself, the system, permanent government, as some have called it, or permanent Washington, is set up in a way where if you start a fourth, a fifth, a 10th political system or party, The system itself is set up in such a way where it's going to be difficult for any reformers to go in there and actually change the thing. Not saying it's impossible, but it's a very steep hill to climb. I know it sounds like a discouragement campaign, so let me switch here for a quick second and let me talk about what can happen, what actually can happen, but a lot of Christians don't want to hear, and a lot of people simply don't want to hear because it's an actual solution. What if, for example, people were to come together and actually say, we're tired of the profligate spending and the way that our government spends our money, and we just don't pay our taxes anymore? That's to give you one example. But then when you propose that, I hear people saying, but then what's going to happen to all of us? So the government is going to jail 30% of the population, or 30% of the tax-paying population decides to stop paying taxes? Just to give you an example, I hear a lot of conservatives talk about the Patriots of '76. Those guys were brave. Well, they opposed the king's taxes. They dumped the tea into the sea, among other things, among other so-called belligerent actions. And nowadays, modern conservatives, can we get a committee to investigate this? So when you talk to people about, hey, let's come together with something substantive, that can't happen. But I'm the one that discourages, even though what I'm actually pointing to here is actual substance that will make an immediate difference. Because think about it. The third party, all it does is that you're still sending people that supposedly represent you, instead of the people themselves saying, no, we're going to represent ourselves by the actions that we take on the matter, instead of abdicating that to someone that we say in Washington will represent our interests, but in reality, they're just there to enrich themselves off the back of the American populace. And think about this. This also has extension in some way, shape, or form with respect to the Christian population inside of the nation. Think about what is happening to Christians inside of the nation with the importation of all of these immigrants into the country, like the Hindus and others, whom are actually erecting. Look at Texas as a perfect example. The largest pagan monument in the United States was erected recently in Texas, the state that supposedly, hey, don't mess with Texas. Texas is this, we can be our own independent country. The governor there, whom is supposedly Christian, just allowed the Hindus there, the Indians there, to erect the biggest pagan monument in the entire country. How is that possible in a Christian nation, supposedly? But there comes that idea of tolerance, right? Go ahead and continue to tolerate your way into a place where now suddenly you're not only the minority, you're the persecuted minority in a country that was created by Christians and for Christians, the very same Christians who eventually abdicated that responsibility and gave it away to foreigners that come into our country to inherently repress the very same people whom created and are supposed to sustain the nation. Explain that one to me, please. It doesn't make any sense. So, yes, it sounds like a good idea on its face. We have to shake up the system. Well, you sent Trump to shake up the system, and he's become the system. He's allowed himself to absorb, for the system to absorb him. What makes you think that a third party is going to be any different? Look, if it works, I'll be the first one to eat crow. I will be the first one to say, great, I was wrong, and I want to be wrong. But you still have this pesky little thing in the place called human nature. Some might even ask, well, Gio, with your plan of people actually taking charge themselves, what makes you think in some way, shape, or form that human nature isn't going to play a role? You're right. Human nature is going to play a role there also. But I tend to favor decentralization more than I do centralization, because centralization usually doesn't end well. That's a biblical principle, by the way. Look up the story, the history of the Tower of Babel. That kind of tells you something. Additionally, when you think about it, who else is going to protect their own interests better than the people themselves when they protect their own interests? That's just a basic understanding of human nature. No one is going to protect your assets better than yourself, not a person that you offload your responsibilities to. That's just a basic human principle. That's a fact. That's understanding human nature. Here's another thing. Why not get a bit more, some have used the term radicalized. I'll use a different term. Why not be more of a realist and adopt the realist positions, and maybe then you can start actually effectuating change instead of depending on others to do it. I'll give you an example. I've talked about this repeatedly. it becomes an important thing to disallow persons within our society that shouldn't be allowed here in the first place so as to have a stable society. Yeah, but that's why we sent Trump, as it were, to deport illegals, and he's not doing that. Well, what if the local populace were to begin to say, now we need to start a local revolt where we're not allowing these people that we don't want in our midst, that they're coming in, as it were, to take our goods and to tell us what to do, which, by the way, ultimately harms us and benefits them. Why don't we disallow those people from even living in our midst? That's a thing that we can talk about. No, but the Civil Rights Act, think about it. You can continue to come up with excuses. Or you can say, these guys at the top are not going to resolve the issue because they're the problem. How about we do it ourselves at the local level? Which has the stated effect of now, again, decentralization, taking away that centralized power that the federal government has, and now you begin to revert it back to the way that the founders had originally envisioned it, which is what? Independence. From the bottom up, not the other way around, which tends to limit independence. When you think about it this way, all of a sudden you start coming up with, I think, better solutions to the current problems that we have. I'll give you another one just to end, because it's a lot. It's a big thought experiment. I understand it. Think about this. There are people in the government that want to centralize money, want to digitize it, because it would be easier for them to control the spending habits of the population, and it would be easier for them to make more money for themselves. Why not, for example, at the local level, and many states have begun to do this, thankfully, Utah, Florida, and others have begun to do this, where you say, no. We're no longer going to use the US dollar to conduct transactions here. We're actually going to decentralize the money supply. And we're going to allow people to transact whichever way that they want at the local level and at the state level. Where instead of using US dollars, people can use gold coins, silver coins, this sort of bank issued or local issued, as it were, monies, paper dollars, whatever the case may be. But the feds are going to fight you. Of course the feds are going to fight you, but if more and more people join the cause, how much difficult is it going to be? More difficult is it going to be for them to enforce it? Think about it. So these are things you have to think on, solutions that, again, decentralization that actually help you get to a point where now you don't have to concern yourself anymore with respect to the distance that is kept here from your average politician locally, from the local level. And now you have more of a situation where your interest and the people in your community's interest, your family's interest, are kept more in the minds of the people that supposedly represent you. Why? Because you have more direct access, you have more direct influence in that. Not under the current system where, again, there's a lot of lip service given to that. But the reason that these people want to achieve power more than anything else is to enrich their pocketbooks and also to centralize power. So, again, I hope to be wrong. I really do, but I can't help but to reflect on the things necessary to make a proper conclusion to this. And I know some people will necessarily call me a pessimist. But if there's one thing that the Bible has taught me is never discount human nature. Because human nature is human nature. It's always going to make an appearance. And human nature attached, a part of human nature is corruption. It's just a part of it. So why not do everything we can to, in a sense, try to disallow that from making an appearance and keeping that in check by the checks and balances that are necessary to do so. Just a thought experiment. If you disagree with me, let me know. If you agree with me, let me know. Write it in the chat. Give me your thoughts on the matter. Just my 2 cents on the matter. There's more to say on it. This is a lengthy discussion to be had because we haven't even talked about what this third party, and I mentioned that I know briefly, but what would this third party's policies necessarily be? That's another thing. We haven't even talked about what the policies, what the proposals for this third party would be. What are the proposals? Who's going to propose these policies? A lot of unanswered questions. So a lot of people are already making clouds in the sky, and you haven't even heard what the substance is from the people themselves that are participating. Those are questions that have to be asked. Just my 2 cents. Think upon it. That's all the time I have left for this edition of the live stream. of Irrespective. A couple of items here before I sign off. Please remember to subscribe, to hit the notification bell, to click the thumbs up button, and to share our content with others if this informs you, if this illuminates you in some way, shape, or form. Our next live stream will be on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope you'll join me then. There's an old clip that is making the rounds from John MacArthur. I think this was maybe a year or two before he passed away, where he talked about how Christians in reality should not be supporting the concept of religious freedom. We're going to take a closer look at that because that is a thought-provoking statement and one that I think Christians need to grapple with. What does the Bible, if anything, what does it have to say about religious freedom? Is it something that Christians should support? Is it more of a pragmatic position? What is the Christian position on supporting religious liberty? We're going to talk about that on Sunday, and I hope that you'll join me for that live stream. Don't forget to donate. It helps us to continue to keep the lights on here in Irrespective. There's a QR code in the upper left-hand corner of the screen that you can scan. Conversely, there is a link available to you in the description box that you can follow. And last but not least, do not forget to follow us on X. The username is Irrespective77, and on TikTok, we are under the username The Irrespective. That's all the time I have left for this edition. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next occasion that we gather, Godspeed.